Hey guys, DMS here. Today I have for you a review of this, the Phillips Fidelio X3. Let's check it out. So, many of you may have seen my video on the Fidelio X2. I wasn't actually a big fan of that headphone, specifically because of its claims to be a reference sound. Now, that said, it wasn't a terrible headphone. It was very bassy, very V-shaped, not particularly detailed, but it seems that with this, Philips has tried to take a very different approach to their sound. And that's why on the table in front of me, I also have this, the DT880 600 ohm, though you could interchange this with the 250 ohm version as well. I tend to think the 600 ohm version performs a little bit better. If you want to know more about that, you can check out the review for it. It'll be linked in the video description. But we'll compare to this in just a minute. First off, let's talk about the build on the X3. The build is not bad. There are some points that I could see as potentially weaker in the long term. Let me zoom in here a little bit. You'll probably hear some clicking for a minute. That is my camera focusing. So on this specific piece, there's a seam right here. And on that seam, it looks like the headband is glued together. Long term, I could see potentially failure either there or where this piece is glued right here. Those are the only two major potential long-term points of failure that I could see, maybe besides this fabric getting dirty and or damaged, though I find that less likely. The headband itself, the suspension strap, is actually very nice. There's some pretty decently strong plastic in here. The suspension strap is nice and soft. It does have a lot of force, so I do get a little bit of pressure pulling up on my ears particularly, but I have a giant head, so this isn't a problem I can see applying to everyone. You can feel behind this piece of fabric, which you can actually move around a little bit, but you can feel behind it there's a bit of a hexagon pattern that is allowing this headphone to be open back, and then the yokes that go through the headphone to let it swivel are at a slight angle, but it doesn't seem to change how the headphone rests on my head. This does have dual entry on the bottom, 3.5 millimeters, so it is capable of being balanced. In fact, it comes with a 3.5 millimeter quarter-inch and balanced set of connections for 2.5, so you can run this balanced if you want. It's not very power demanding, though maybe more so than the X3 was, so you can balance it if you want. That may help. It does provide a lower noise floor, which is nice because these do lean towards the bright end. Pads on these are actually really nice. They're a very responsive memory foam, so you can push them in like this, and they take a while to come back out, as you can see there. So once this warms up and really conforms to your head, comfort is pretty great. They do feel a little bit stiff at first, so keep that in mind if you plan on wearing these for a while. They will get a little more comfortable as you wear them, as long as you don't have a giant head like mine. The pads go on via these little notches right here. It just slides right on, nice and easy. There's an alignment pin that helps you get them lined up. They really only fit on one way anyway. You could try and put them on the wrong ears, but then the pin wouldn't line up and they wouldn't sit flat. There's a foam ring around here to ensure that the pads seal onto the headphone, and you can see behind this paper FSD, there is an angled driver in this headphone. Angled drivers in some cases, especially in dynamics, can help with sound staging or imaging, which, interestingly enough, is one of the stronger points of this headphone. So build-wise, not bad. I could see some aesthetic things, like I said, wearing over time, like maybe this edging that's glued, but I don't see anything critical actually failing. I don't see these headphones breaking anytime in the near future. So let's talk sound. And let's talk about why I have the DT880 out here as well. The sound of these, when I put them on, I thought, wow, this is quite literally just like the DT880, but something is different. They sound a little bit brighter, they sound a little bit punchier, but they also sound thinner. So why is that happening? Well, if you look at the frequency response of these, which I actually waited to measure, as I generally do until after I formed my opinions on this headphone, it does have wider staging than the DT880, but I think most of that is due to this dip it has in the lower treble on the frequency response. Well, I'd say mid treble on the frequency response. So bass-wise, the Fidelio X2 is a little bit more elevated. Not as warm though, but more elevated in the sub-frequencies. You move through relatively linear bass, then it bumps up a little bit as you are approaching the upper mid-range, and then dips down before going up into our peaky treble, which Interestingly enough, the DT880 600 ohm does not do that. It's a bit more of a rolled off sub bass, a little bit of warmth in the low mid range, linear through the mid range and low highs, and then we go into our treble peaks. So the main differences in frequency response between these two is that this is going to be a little bit more extended. This is going to be a bit more warm, but this is linear and doesn't have that dip in the lower or mid treble, whereas this does. But interestingly enough, even though the DT880 on paper is actually a brighter headphone, this sounds brighter. And the reasoning I think for that is similar to an effect we get in the Sennheiser HD 700 and 800, whereas the treble is not an insanely high peak, but it is preceded by a very big dip. And I think that the dip in front of the treble peaks on this are particularly what's making it sound more sibilant in the highs. Whereas I think the more linear response in the mid-range and low treble through the DT880 is more forgiving for its treble peaks. It would make sense that having a range that's dipped down and more recessed would allow a range above that to stand out more, which is an upside and a downside for this headphone. So the upside is that with this dip, we are getting a bit more staging out of the headphone. It's a very airy staging headphone that's very nice. It sounds big. It sounds very crisp, but the downside, of course, there is that we get sibilance very easily. It's very easy to step into sibilant territory. I would say that the DT880 is a bit more resolving, but definitely more narrow, whereas this is not quite as resolving. It's still pretty detailed, not quite as resolving, but has a bit more width to it. So it's going to be a very interesting use case. I feel like overall, as a 100% rounded off package, I still feel like the DT880 is a better headphone overall. However, I can see this appealing to some people. And I would say if this wasn't as peaky in the treble, if it didn't sound quite as thin in male and female vocal ranges, well, I should just say vocal ranges, if it didn't sound quite as thin in vocal ranges, and wasn't quite as bright, I would say that this is a drastic improvement over the X2. It's a bit tough. See, the X2 was a fun headphone. I gave it crap for calling itself a reference headphone when it was a fun headphone, but as just a fun headphone, it was good. So this is a big departure from Philips's original sound with that headphone. Was it the right move or not? Well, it's tough to say because it's not a bad headphone, but the problem is that they've moved into a type of sound where there is very, very tough competition, like this and others. Tiger 300R even being one. And this does cost more than that very tough competition. It's really going to be up to you guys whether or not you think that's worth it. As far as imaging is concerned, I think that this is actually a pretty good contender. It's not as good as the 300R in imaging, but it is still pretty decent. And as far as power is concerned, you can power this on most things just fine, except for maybe a motherboard output. I did struggle to power this on the headphone out of a computer, but basically every amp I plugged it up to sounded just fine. The recent topping amp that I reviewed would actually be a pretty good pairing for this if you are looking for an amplifier for this headphone. If you already own it or if you're considering purchasing it, I would look back at that review of that topping amplifier because I could see them as being a very good combination. The times I listened to them, it powered them very easily, and they worked pretty well together. So, conclusions. The Fidelio X3, is it better than the Fidelio X2? On a technical level, yes. However, once again, very steep competition in its range. So whether or not it's worth it, that's up to you. It's less linear, it has more soundstage, but has a bit more sibilance on top. But it is easier to drive. Now, Philips did release another headphone recently that I have a review coming out on, I think Thursday, for everyone watching this. That's on the SHP 9600, and I actually kind of liked that one. So, if you want to see that video, make sure you stick around, subscribe, but it'll also be early access on my Patreon, link in the video description. If you want to help support the channel, you can get access to that video before it comes out. Now, disclaimer, Philips did send me this headphone. I've not been paid or compensated in any way to say anything in this video. All thoughts and opinions have been my own, and I do appreciate Philips sending me these headphones. But as always, if you like this video, please leave a like down below and a comment letting me know what you want to see in the future. If you want to support the channel, you can get early access to my videos on the Patreon like I mentioned, or you can get an analog shirt like this, linked in the video description. They help make videos like this continue. If you want to get active in the community, you can at forum.hifiguides.com, and as always, don't forget to stick around and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Until the next one, guys. Peace.